Well, hi there students, it's Mr. Verzette. This video is for our very beginner 3D class. This is mainly for students who are absent on instruction day or those who need to go back and double check and get some of the instruction for the notes before beginning. So first, let's start with positive negative space. This is mainly a review from our previous lesson, but remember, in sculpture, positive space is the space that a physical object physically occupies. It's critical to be mindful of this as we work. The way we control the use of our positive and our negative space results in interesting work. This will tie directly into silhouette in just a moment. But positive space is like if you look at your hand, that would be your hand and your fingers. Negative space would be the spaces in between your fingers. Now in sculpture, we play with positive and negative space like this. We can actually have negative space inside the positive space. Like see these little holes right here? And this humongous gap right here also functions as negative space. Moving on to silhouette, you'll see why this is important. A silhouette is the outer form of a thing as a whole. The way our brain works is that we will look at the outside of a thing before we start to process the inside of the thing. So you'll see the overall shape of the thing just as from a distance, before you notice the color, the patterns, the textures, and so on. Understanding that this is how the brain perceives our world around us, that means that three-dimensional art can have a huge impact on how cool it looks to our viewer. So we want to make sure we have a strong silhouette. Let's define what a strong silhouette is. A strong silhouette is a silhouette that has negative space in it, but not only just in it, but it also moves in and out of the overall shape. See these little gaps between the arms and the legs? All sorts of negative space is happening here. And there's even negative space inside the actual silhouette pieces. That makes our brain go, that's interesting. Another aspect of a strong silhouette is that some areas stand out. They are emphasized. I bet you can tell that the arms are emphasized and they stand out. For this robot, those arms are what make it unique and give its advantage in combat. So they were emphasized. They were made bigger, more detailed, and such. And finally, for a strong silhouette and in sculpture in general, you want to focus on big, middle, and little. Big, middle, and little. That means that you have big forms, middle forms, and little forms. Both big, middle, and little positive space and big, middle, and little negative space. We're going to go into the style of art that we're going to be using for this exercise, and that's called abstraction. So right here we have what's called the objectivity scale. What the heck is abstract art? And basically a scale means, a sliding spectrum from left to right, and so objectivity means like the object, meaning realistic. So things on the right follow rules of physics and are very realistic. They have texture, lighting, they are calculated in 3D perspective, the cast shadow is calculated, the coloring is calculated based on how much light is shining on it, and so forth. Way over here on the extreme opposite end is the other side of objectivity, which is non-objectivity, which means there are no rules, there are no calculations. The thing has literally no representation in real world life at all. And then there's all this in-between space. Realism is as close to the real world that it gets. It's very literal, it is what it is, and it follows the laws of physics. When we start to move further over to the left, we get into what's called idealism. That's where style starts to take the focus. And if we look at this tomato, you see it's in kind of a loose, strokey, impressionistic painting style. Also, now we have more of a pen and ink kind of a style with this cone. It still follows law, it still follows perspective and rules. It's just starting to do it in a new way. Cartooning would also be in an idealistic style of some sort. So these areas here, this cartoony tomato, this sort of cartoony cone, and these shapes would fall under idealism. And as we start to go even further, now we get into the realm of the abstract. So abstract means, for the beginner, that you can still identify what you're looking at. It couldn't exist in the real world. For example, this NBC Peacock logo, if this was a real thing, none of these forms are touching each other, gravity would make them all clatter to the ground and fall apart. Likewise for this as well. There would be a lot of strange things happening in the real world for light to do this to this tomato. We can still tell that it's a tomato. We can still see that this is a peacock. But now it's full of meaning and symbolism. Look at how they use the different colors to communicate all the different facets of programming they have on NBC. And look how they use the use of negative space by cutting the shape of a peacock's neck and beak into it. There actually is no neck or beak here, it's just a hole. So abstraction, and it looks kind of like a bright sunrise. So there's all sorts of symbolism with this. And then let's go a little further over, and then things start to fall apart even more. We can still tell this is a tomato, but it's very simplified. And then here is the Starfleet logo. It's full of meaning and symbolism once you're getting into the abstract realm. You're communicating things that are deeper, where someone would look at your art and see a higher meaning to it. And because of that, we then can bend rules without breaking them. Expressive means that there are no rules. The meaning is different for everybody. Non-representational means it doesn't really look like anything that we could point to. I mean, for this one, which could mean tomato, the only representation it might have might be the squares, and that's it. It's mostly shape, form, and texture. So this is the realm that has no rules. This is the realm where we're starting to get into symbol. And in terms of your project, we're going to be in this area here. Okay? And the final piece of instruction for your work is facial proportions. Because we are making a mask, we need to know how big to make stuff and where to put it. So these are generic proportions for the shape of a head. If you follow these, your mask will work. If you don't, you might have weird things like your eye line way up here or your nose way down here. You want to generally follow this as a base. You don't have to have it as an extreme egg shape, but what you want to pay attention to is where do the eyes go. If you go from the top of the skull to the bottom of the chin, the eyes fall in between those measurements. If you want to know where the nose goes, the nose is between where the eyes were and the bottom of the chin. So we're working in halves again. And then finally, to know where the mouth goes, it's between the nose and the chin. So we're working in halves there as well. If you place it in these areas, it will be proportionate, meaning it will look believable and understandable. So moving on, this will be the section of the video that covers the specific lesson that's directed towards my students here in class. So students, you all get a hard copy brief. The brief has your assignment directions in detail. Your brief is going to be 4 pages for this one. It'll have your directions on the front, the grading rubric on page 2, and then pages 3 and 4 show the procedure with diagrams and such. Kind of in bullet points, the objectives for this is to create fully original work. So no written letters, no numbers, no logos, no symbols. You have to make everything from scratch. Now that also includes the mask itself. You will be creating a mask that communicates your personality. Your personality is a non-objective thing. We cannot put it into a bottle. We need to use things that we can identify with to communicate that. So the message has to be clear and to a mass audience. You gotta use abstraction and visual metaphor, just like we covered with the objectivity spectrum. And it has to be creative. The opposite of creative is cliche. We've seen it before, that kind of thing. So you want to use your own solutions and your own ideas. Demonstrate your 3D fundamentals that you've learned up to this point in the year. So show me a strong silhouette, not just a generic silhouette. Demonstrate the armature process. Show me your strategic use of positive and negative space. Show me the papier-mâché process, and then basic head proportions. Finally, demonstrate your 3D painting skills. That would be a 1, 2, 3 read on your 3-dimensional forms and basic 3D painting techniques that we learned from last class. Now let's look at what are we actually going to be doing. You've got your brief. What's the next step? Well, I will provide you with the concept sheet. That is your restriction generator for this lesson. You'll need to do that in writing first, and only after it's complete, then will I give you the mask blueprint sheet. That's where you get to use all this raw material that you've brainstormed in writing to draw a blueprint of your mask in detail. Use color, use as much skill as you can. You want to solve as many problems at this stage so that all you have to do is focus on controlling the paper mache later. You'll have a graded production check after this step. And to get the go-ahead to move on to armature building, you have to have both of these steps completed. You can't put paper mache over a pre-generated template or a pre-made mask or even a mannequin head. In your own personal work you can, but for this project, just cardboard, paper, tape, wire, all the good stuff. Now once you've finished these 3 steps, finished your armature, then you paper mache this base. Once it dries, rip the guts out, and then that will leave you with this mask base. Once the mask base is finished, then the actual creative artwork begins. Start to build what are called your secondary armatures. That would be all the stuff that needs to be sculpted to go onto the mask. Apply a paper mache pass to those as well. By that point, you'll have multiple layers built up in paper mache over your entire mask. It'll probably look like this, and then when it's time to paint, apply a printer paper mache pass to clean it, seal it, and hide any of those coupons showing the monthly deals so they don't show through the colors. At the very end, you'll have something that's like this. When you paint it, have a 1, 2, 3 read on all forms. Be mindful of painting textures and light on your piece, and you are allowed to use up to 10% of your artwork to be composed of props. For example, this student had a small portion that was composed of fake flowers. Next, let's look at common mistakes and questions. These are just the questions I get every year, so let's go over them beforehand. Does it have to have eye holes and fit on my face? Well, the answer is no, but it must resemble a mask. It should be able to hang on a wall just like a mask, but it doesn't actually have to function as a mask, if that makes sense. But we should look at it and go, oh, that's a mask. Can I make an animal face? Well, that's an objective subject matter. Just making an animal head and saying that's a self-portrait is not our objective here. Now, you could use some animal elements incorporated into your mask, but no, you won't be making an animal head for this project. I get this one with the struggling students. Abstract art is subjective, so since there aren't any rules, I can do whatever I want as long as I try my best and believe that I understand what I'm doing. And the answer is no. You need to follow the directions to succeed in this class and work within the grading standards of the class to earn passing scores. What you believe you understand will be shown in the effectiveness of your execution. The meaning of the mask means something to me, so that's good enough for a good grade. The answer is no. Your symbolism should be able to communicate to a mass audience, meaning if you're trying to communicate that you have anger issues through your mask, we all should be able to look at your mask and understand exactly that that's what you're saying. Can I take it home? The answer is absolutely, as long as you're working on it more here at school than at home. I won't grade it otherwise. And I have other videos going over this, but I have many students that take it home and then forget it, and then forget it, and then forget it. Turns out it shows up fully completed. I haven't seen any of the process. And how do I know that you were the one who made it? It could have been a relative, it could have been anything. How do I know that you followed the step-by-steps to demonstrate your understanding of the process? It needs to be here, otherwise it won't be graded. And another one is, can I use pre-generated models, dummy heads, mask templates, etc.? And the answer is no, you must be fully original. You need to build everything from scratch, with exception to the props.